The Arctic, a place of harsh winters, frozen tundras, and isolation. Yet beneath its ice lies a treasure, one that could reshape the future of the world. With global warming rapidly melting the ice, a new world is emerging. A world filled with undiscovered oil reserves and new shipping routes. Whoever controls the Arctic holds the lifeline of world trade. The ice is melting, and so is the peace. Nations are racing to secure their piece of this frozen frontier. But there's a price that could change the balance of global power forever. For decades, the Arctic was a remote, inhospitable wasteland, a place where only explorers and researchers dared to venture. But the tides of change are shifting, and what was once a barren wilderness is now an economic battleground. The region, which covers about 6% of the Earth's surface, holds an estimated 30% of the world's undiscovered natural gas and 13% of its untapped oil. The meltwater isn't just a sign of climate change, it's revealing the keys to the world's energy future. This is more than just an environmental issue, it's a geopolitical one. As the ice recedes, once impassable shipping lanes are becoming navigable. The northern sea route, once frozen shut for most of the year, is now open for several months, slashing travel time between Europe and Asia by thousands of miles. Nations are competing for control over these waters, with the promise of energy resources, new trade routes, and strategic military positioning on the line. The world's superpowers are waking up to the reality that the Arctic is the next frontier, and this new race could define the 21st century.
When governments and shipping companies talk about real operations, West Passage, which cuts through Canada's shallow waters, tight channels, limited infrastructure, and legal disputes over sovereignty. Commercial shipping barely touches it. China studies it, but it does not plan around it. So when China talks about Arctic trade, it means one thing: Russia's Northern Sea route. And here's why that route exists now. In summer, Arctic sea ice retreats enough to expose navigable water along much of Russia's coast. The western section near Norway stays ice-free most of the year thanks to warm Atlantic currents. The eastern section still freezes hard in winter, but during peak summer months, ice thins enough for ice-class cargo ships, often with icebreaker support, to pass through. This creates a seasonal corridor. From roughly July to October, conditions can allow commercial transit. Outside that window, ice closes the door fast. That seasonality explains why the route has not exploded overnight. Shipping relies on schedules. Global logistics hate uncertainty. A path that only works part of the year must offer serious advantages to be worth the trouble. And on paper, it does. Compared to the southern route through Suez, the Arctic path is far shorter for Northeast Asia. From Shanghai to Rotterdam, the distance drops by about 2,500 nautical miles. From Japan, the cut can exceed 4,000 nautical miles. Less distance means less fuel, fewer days at sea, and lower operating costs. But geography is only half the story. Unlike Suez or Panama, the Northern Sea route is not an international canal. Russia treats it as a national shipping lane. Foreign vessels must request permission, follow Russian regulations, and often hire Russian icebreaker escorts. Moscow controls access, traffic rules, and emergency response along the route. China accepts this. Beijing doesn't challenge Russian authority here. Instead, it works within it, because access matters more than ownership. That political reality is one reason the Polar Silk Road exists at all. So this is not a free-for-all across melting ice. It's a narrow, state-controlled corridor that opens briefly each year, and one that China believes is worth long-term investment despite its limits. So why does China care so much to get involved this early when the route is still difficult and seasonal? At first glance, China's interest in the Arctic looks strange. China has no Arctic coastline, no Arctic population, no historical role in polar navigation. Yet over the past decade, it has invested billions of dollars, built icebreakers, joined Arctic institutions, and branded an entire trade concept around a route that only works a few months a year. That tells you this is not about short-term profit. It's about long-term trade security. China's economy depends on shipping. Roughly 90% of its trade by volume moves by sea, and most of that trade flows through a small number of choke points: Malacca, Bab el-Mandeb, and the Suez Canal. These routes sit far from China's borders and under heavy U.S. naval presence. From Beijing's perspective, that's a vulnerability. If trade disruptions happen, war, sanctions, blockages, or even accidents like the Ever Given, China feels the shock immediately. The Arctic route offers something different: distance from geopolitical pressure points. Ships using the Northern Sea route avoid Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean, the Middle East, and the Red Sea entirely. No piracy zones, no canal queues, no single narrow passage where one accident freezes global trade. That alone makes the route attractive, even if it only works part of the year. Then there's the math. Shipping costs live and die on distance and time. A Shanghai-Rotterdam voyage through Suez typically takes 35 to 45 days. In strong Arctic conditions, that trip can drop to around 25 days, and in rare best-case scenarios, even less. Fewer days mean lower fuel consumption, lower crew costs, and faster inventory turnover. In 2021, China's COSCO Shipping ran multiple Arctic voyages and reported saving thousands of tons of fuel compared to the southern route. Those savings matter at scale, but shipping is only one layer. China also sees the Arctic as a resource corridor. The Russian Arctic holds massive reserves of natural gas, oil, and minerals. China is already deeply embedded there. It owns 30% of the Yamal LNG project, one of the largest Arctic energy developments in the world, and finances much of its infrastructure. LNG tankers now sail from northern Siberia to China through the Arctic every summer, and sometimes even in winter. That energy doesn't move without ships. By supporting Arctic shipping, China secures supply lines for resources it already depends on. There's also diplomacy. China gained observer status in the Arctic Council in 2013, placing it inside the main forum that governs Arctic cooperation. Since then, it has funded research stations, scientific expeditions, and polar climate studies. On paper, this is science. In practice, it builds presence, experience, and legitimacy. China also invested heavily in icebreaking capability.
West closely monitoring growing military cooperation between Russia and China.
The Arctic is no longer a low-tension region.
You've got the incoming U.S. president calling the Arctic a top priority and promising to drill for oil and gas. Canada is massively beefing up its military presence, investing $72 billion over the next couple of decades into Arctic defense. And Russia and China working together on what they call a polar Silk Road.
There are more people, more interested eyes looking to the Arctic.
So why exactly is all of this happening now? Let's go through it. The Arctic is opening up. These thick blocks of ice are melting, clearing the way for ships to travel through. According to the Canadian government, by 2050, the Arctic Ocean will become an increasingly viable shipping route between Europe and Asia during the summer.
By the middle of this century, there will be no polar ice cap at the height of summer.
That's a big deal, because right now, the fastest way to ship goods from Europe to Asia is through the Suez Canal in Egypt. But, as we've seen more and more, the Suez Canal is not always the most reliable route.
A giant container ship ran aground in the Suez Canal after losing power.
Civilian shipping in the Red Sea has become more collateral damage to the war in Gaza.
So what if, instead of going down south and passing through the Middle East, you could go north and use the Arctic Ocean as a shortcut across the globe? There are essentially two ways you could do this. One is using what's known as the Northwest Passage. This would take you through the Arctic on the North American side, weaving through Canada's northern archipelagos. The other route through the Arctic is known as the Northern Sea Route. This one passes through the Russian side of the Arctic Ocean, along the Siberian coastline. Both of these routes offer a much shorter path between Europe and Asia than the Suez Canal. It shaves off up to 5,000 kilometers. That's a third of the trip, or up to a full week of travel. And the warmer the ocean gets, the easier those routes become to navigate. Countries realize this potential, and so there is a battle for control.
Even non-Arctic states are looking to the Arctic and inserting themselves into the Arctic as much as they can.
It has potential shipping lanes. It has a tremendous endowment of natural resources.
The Arctic is full of untapped gold, nickel, copper, diamonds, platinum, and researchers believe it's holding about 90 billion barrels of oil and 30% of the world's undiscovered natural gas. And all of this is creating incredible tension, partly because no one can seem to agree which parts of the Arctic belong to whom, and because the prospect of friendly negotiation is shrinking. Shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine, the Arctic Council, which is the place where Canada, the US, Nordic countries, and Russia all got together to discuss these issues, they stopped meeting entirely, which brings us to North America's most pressing concern when it comes to the Arctic.
Guardrails that prevent conflicts are increasingly under immense strain. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine has led us all to ask, who's next?
Up here on the top of the world, there is a vast expanse of ice and of emptiness. And yet Russia has made deploying its military up here to these extreme conditions a real priority.
Russia has, by far, the largest share of Arctic territory. Almost a quarter of its territory is north of the Arctic Circle, and it controls 24,000 kilometers of Arctic coastline. Over the past few years, it has been steadily building up its military presence in the area, investing in air bases, naval ports, icebreaker fleets, upgrading its submarines. Russia says this is to deter adversaries from even considering a potential attack, and to show that if an attack came, they would defend themselves at all costs.
Historically, Russia's northern coast there was protected by ice, and there wasn't a lot of traffic. And so as the ice has retreated, and all of a sudden it's sort of like this potential, attack point.
But all of this has the West on edge because it knows Russia is not content simply to defend its holdings. It wants to expand its sphere of influence.
We now have 7 of the 8 Arctic states are NATO, and Russia is not NATO. That can create conditions for tension.
People in North America have become a lot more concerned about what the Russians are up to, what Vladimir Putin is up to.
After the end of the Cold War a few decades ago, Russia closed dozens of military bases in the Arctic. It also agreed to a low-tension approach to Arctic disputes. But over this past decade, it has reopened 50 of those military bases. It's estimated that Russia now has nearly double the number of military bases in the Arctic than Canada, the US, Denmark, and Norway combined. And over the past year, it has ramped up weapons testing in the region too, including testing of hypersonic cruise missiles that Russia says fly at 9 times the speed of sound and have a range of over 1,000 kilometers.
The Arctic is the shortest distance between North America and Eurasia. And so if you are shooting missiles between those two continents, you're going to go over Arctic routes.
This Russian military base in the middle of the Arctic Ocean, for example, is actually closer to Canada's military base in Nunavut than Nunavut is to Ottawa or Toronto. And just look how close this Russian military airbase is to Alaska. According to NORAD, that's the organization that tracks and protects North American airspace, Russia has been testing bombers capable of carrying nuclear weapons from this peninsula, at times coming within just 50 nautical miles of Alaskan territory. Now, to be clear, there's no reason to believe that Russia plans to actually use these bombers to attack North America. But the fact that they're testing them that close to the US has them and Canada thinking maybe they should beef up their military presence in that area too.
Americans are nervous because they just don't know what to expect.
I think given the situation with Russia and sort of global geopolitical competition with China, we are very concerned about making sure that our missile defense architecture is fit to purpose.
And it's not just missile defense systems the West is focused on when it comes to the Arctic.
This is Polar Dagger, a mission intended to show Russia's decision makers what the U.S. military can do in the remote areas of the Arctic.
Between January and March of 2024, NATO conducted its biggest joint military exercise since the Cold War, called Steadfast Defender 24. One of its main focuses, the Arctic. NATO says the goal was to show their ability and intent to reinforce and defend the Nordic region in the event of Russian aggression, and to show their capability to carry out such operations in Arctic terrain.
We have a large number of Marines who have never been in the snow in their life before.
Say, for instance, in a future conflict, being able to fly with different countries, just the one that is on station in that area at that time, is making us 100 times more dangerous.
20,000 soldiers, 50 plus ships, more than 100 aircraft from 13 countries were involved in these Arctic drills. Russia took this as a provocation. And since then, things have really started to ramp up. The Chinese military is involved too. In July, the US released this photo that they say shows joint flights by Russian and Chinese bombers near Alaska's coast. A few months later, China and Russia openly announced they were running joint aerial and sea patrols in the area. This video recorded from the cockpit of a US F-16 flying near Alaska, shows a Russian fighter jet maneuvering within just a few feet of the American plane in September.
We're seeing activities by foreign states that are approaching northern communities, and that's a real problem.
Analysts have for a long time argued that Canada's Arctic is much too vulnerable. And that shows not just on a military and national security level, but among people who've lived there for generations.
In terms of airfields, in terms of naval and civilian port facilities, in terms of roads that are durable, that can survive climate change, massive underinvestment historically. And that's had an impact on the flourishing of civilian communities, but it's also had an impact on the ability of Canada to defend its sovereignty claims in the high north.
Canada's Department of National Defence underscored that very point recently in showing just how many fewer active personnel are stationed there right now. And the infrastructure, those important airports, naval ports, and bases,